So you have Eugene McCarthy, and you have LBJ, right? You have Johnson, and he's running. But then the Tet Offensive happens, and Eugene McCarthy actually, you know how they have the primary system, right? Eugene McCarthy beat Johnson in the New Hampshire primary. Do you know how many times, first of all, if you challenge a sitting president, that's rarely ever done. If you're a Democrat, challenging a fellow Democrat who's president, that's rarely ever done. Like, nobody challenged Obama, right? No one challenged Bush in a primary too. No one does that. But Johnson looked weak, and Eugene McCarthy won, and after Tet Offensive and after Eugene McCarthy won the primary, Johnson decided not to run for president. This is earth-shattering news. A sitting president, think about this, a sitting president who has passed Medicare, Medicaid, the War on Poverty, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 65 Voting Rights Act, all of these things, Head Start programs, student loans for kids, all of this stuff, the NEH, all this stuff, not running for office because he's so unpopular. And when he does that, a senator from New York named Robert Kennedy decides to put his hat in the ring. So you have Robert Kennedy running, and he is taking not only the anti-war vote, but he's also getting the black vote. And you have a third Democrat running. When Johnson decides not to run, his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, decides to run. Those of you who know anything about sports, where do the Vikings play? Does anyone know? The Hubert Humphrey Metrodome. Humphrey is a legend in Minnesota. He was a very liberal guy too, domestically. But was a supporter of the war. So you have Bobby and Eugene McCarthy who are anti-war. You have Hubert Humphrey who was more of a hawk. On the Republican side, you have Nixon. Nixon ends up winning the primary. And you have an independent. Does anyone know who our independent is? You know him from before. In fact, you know him from Forrest Gump. The governor that tried to not allow Alabama to be segregated, named George Wallace. George Wallace ran in 1968 as an independent. And he stood for what's called law and order. When you hear a Southern person talk about law and order, that's code for I don't like black people. Every politicians know how words work. And they hear different things. When a liberal person hears the word liberty, or they hear a conservative saying freedom and liberty, what they mean is individual rights, right, lower taxes. If a liberal says opportunity, what they're talking about is more government regulation, right? Well, law and order means we're going to make sure people stay in their place. In fact, for Nixon was kind of running as this too. And Nixon had as his vice president a guy named Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew eventually resigned from being the vice president because he didn't pay all his taxes. But he was governor from Maryland, and he got famous on keeping blacks where they belong, in the words of white Southerners. And this was what Nixon called his Southern strategy. Today, how do most Southern states vote in national elections? Republican or Democrat? Republican. In fact, most governors in the South are Republican because of this. Nixon changed the map. The Southern strategy made... The Democrats had basically dominated the South from Andrew Jackson up until Lyndon Johnson. But now it's switched. It looked like Bobby was going to win. He started winning primaries. Eugene McCarthy was not particularly happy that another anti-war candidate whose name was Kennedy, who had lots of money, got into the race. Eugene McCarthy kind of bowed out. Kennedy starts winning primaries, and in June won the California primary. And he was giving his acceptance speech in the Ambassador Hotel, which you have to write down, the Ambassador Hotel or anything like that. But he's giving an acceptance speech in Los Angeles. And he gave a quick little speech, and he said, now it's on to wherever he said. And he did the famous Kennedy thing where he does this with his hair. The Kennedys were always pushing their hair back this way. and he gave the peace sign and he walked off, and about 20 seconds later you hear a couple gunshots, and it's him. He's been shot by a guy named Sirhan Sirhan. A couple of years ago, there was a conference I was at, and a guy named Jimmy Breslin, who was a writer, he was there, and he saw Bobby. He literally was there, and he saw Bobby Kennedy get shot, like from here to here. It was in the cafeteria, or the kitchen rather, because oftentimes when like famous or powerful people leave an area, they go to the kitchen because it's easier to get out of the back door. And Sirhan Sirhan was waiting on him, and with that shot, any chance for the Vietnam War to stop was going to end. Nixon ran as not a crazy hawk, but we need to win, peace with honor, which is code for we got to keep fighting. In the 1968 National Convention in Chicago, this is the Chicago 68 Convention is famous because Bobby had just died, and Democrats were furious. There were going to be protests everywhere, and the Chicago mayor, Richard Daley, brutally suppressed the protest. It was on TV. You got kids bleeding all over the place. You guys know who Dan Rather is? Ben Rather or Tom Brokaw. One of them literally got punched by somebody on camera at the convention. It was wild, and the Democrats were falling apart, and Nixon was waiting in the wings. So you have Humphrey. So Humphrey ends up winning it, but no one's excited about Humphrey winning. Humphrey wins the Democratic nomination. Nixon wins the Republican nomination. And George Wallace, I want to. This is what when he was talking. This is his platform: putting blacks back into their place and bombing North Vietnam into the Stone Age. That was what he ran for. Now, are there people in the South, do you think, who are going to vote for that guy?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. That makes a lot of sense for Southern white dudes in the 1960s.
The sad fact is I think that still makes sense.
Do what?
The sad fact is I still think someone could run on that today and win.
I would say if you ran on the anti-immigrant, blow up people who don't look like you vote, I'd say you might not win the South, but I might say that you'd be competitive in the South. So Nixon won the election, won the 68 election, but not, in fact, he didn't even have 50%. He barely beat Humphrey, popular vote, and Wallace got quite a few votes, and Nixon ends up becoming president. I wanted to get the 68 election out there because tomorrow we're going to pick up with Nixon and talk about the Nixon stuff, which is fascinating. And we'll get to the end of Vietnam. But what I want to show you now is Bobby Kennedy and the assassination and the MLK thing. If you could